Um, Two standard sort of counter-arguments to your line of reasoning tend to be the following. On the one hand, there is the concern that having a consistently good life is in principle impossible because there might be some universal law of contrast. You cannot have the good without the bad. That's an argument that I hear very often, and it seems to be believed by at least a sizable proportion of the population. So I would like you to comment on that. And the other argument is sort of a sociological concern. So people have read Brave New World, and I know you've written a very extensive critique of Brave New World. And indeed, like when we mention these possibilities, very common reaction is, well, the elite will probably use biotech to control population, makes us happy pigs, completely unaware of more possibilities, and just submit to their power. So what would you have to say to these two counter-arguments?
Okay. There is no fundamental law of nature that says that organic robots have to be unhappy even part of the time. It's not like conservation of electric charge or something like that, where the positive necessarily cancels out the negative. Yes, intuitively the idea that if one is having gradients of bliss, then somehow the dips will somehow be unpleasant, and that somehow pleasure and pain are largely or even wholly relative. But sadly, one only needs to look today at those people who are chronically depressed and or in pain. In many cases, they will not, at least in the more severe cases, never actually have experiences above hedonic zero. In the case of some severe depressives, they can't even imagine what it is like to be happy, or even what the word happiness means. Now, is one really going to tell them that somehow, because they can't contrast their misery with happiness, that the misery is somehow less real? And conversely, one does get so-called hypothymic people who more or less their whole lives are spent above hedonic zero. Sure, some of their days and some of their experiences are even more wonderful than others, but it's not as though the dips are somehow really unpleasant. A more mundane example, and well, perhaps celibate philosophers shouldn't talk about these things, but consider two people making love. Some aspects of love-making may be even more enjoyable and rewarding than others, but it's not as though the aspects that are merely very pleasant, as distinct from sublime, are somehow really unpleasant. And so this argument that pleasure and pain are purely relative just doesn't seem to hold water. The second objection you raised was Brave New World, and intuitively won't ensuring a population that is invincibly happy lead to a situation where the ruling elites are controlling and manipulating these passive dupes who are drugged up on Soma or something like heroin. In fact, one can almost turn this objection on its head, in that it is depression and low mood that is associated with subordinate behaviour. Indeed, depression has been described as the internalized correlate of the losing subroutine, and that other things being equal, raising people's mood, level of well-being, actually makes them more engaged, less prone to be submissive, to exhibit subordinate behaviour. And the sociological dynamic of a society in which there weren't any depressives, in which we all led lives animated by gradients of intelligent bliss, it's almost as if you've got the opposite problem to that of a society in which many people exhibit learned helplessness, behavioural despair. So, no, I don't think that objection is tenable. One other aspect of Brave New World, if you recall, is Soma. Soma, though it does induce euphoria, it's very shallow, one-dimensional, hedonistic well-being, with hedonism connoting something very shallow, amoral, one-dimensional, whereas the use of biotech should enable us to enjoy an immense multi-dimensional spectrum of rich experience. So one shouldn't conceptualize pleasure drugs as simply a case of getting high. I mean, sure, in some sense, as extraordinary well-being could be dismissed using this kind of terminology, but if instead of getting high one spoke of rich, sublime experiences, tremendous diversity of different states of well-being, this would put a different gloss on it. Just one final point, I think this is quite a common worry. Aren't these wonderful new biotechnologies going to be accessible simply to the rich elites, or at best simply to the affluent West? I don't think one should dismiss this out of hand, but it's worth recalling that any information-based technology will most likely have a cost that tends to zero. It's not as though the substrates of well-being need to be rationed, and if you look at any new technology today, anything from new drugs to mobile phones, yes, initially it is the privileged rich elites, but they very, very rapidly filter down to the rest of the world, such that now in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, you'll find people who are in many ways extraordinarily poor. Nonetheless, they will have their mobile phones, their smartphones. If a new version of Microsoft Word is introduced, then everyone in Thailand can have it within the same week. Information-based technologies are not the same as traditional material goods, and that once one has the expertise and understanding to, for instance, sequence the genome, to use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and create designer zygotes and the like, the spread of this technology to the rest of the world will be very, very rapid indeed.